first item is going to be how to add a texture to a brush or the pencil tool. It doesn't really matter which tool, but it still requires you to follow the same workflow. So the request came in of how do we get in a wood grain texture and be able to work with the wood grain texture. I went and just did a quick search for a wood grain, found it, saved it out, and that gets me part of the way there, but it doesn't get me all the way because this is a JPEG file, which you would think a JPEG file, that would be great. I could use a JPEG file, and if I want to create a brush, I could do that. So I could go in the brush tool. Let me just close that there. And let's say I'm making a new brush, so I click on the button. I'll say this will be my wood grain awesome. So wood grain awesome, there it is, and then I can go look at the brush properties and see what's there. And by default, the brush will come up at whatever size you currently have it set at. But if we want a texture, it's using the texture option here. If it doesn't show on your screen, it may look like this. You see the word texture, so you click on that. And again, this is the brush properties. So when you have any of your brush presets, you click on the arrow, comes up, and now we can see I want to use a textured tip. And then it says, hey, let's select a texture. Well, if I don't already have a texture selected, I have to click on the folder icon and go find it. But JPEG, notice I have two JPEGs here, and I made one, the one I saved, I made a grayscale version thinking maybe that would be it. But no, it's not JPEG. It requires you to use a PSD or a TGA file as your file format that you can use for textures. So I'm like, sweet, okay, I'll bring in a PSD. So I went into Photoshop, took my wood grain, and then I saved it out as a PSD, saved it as a PSD. Allows me now to select that. There's my wood grain texture, and I can say OK. Now we can decide how we want the texture to work. We can see if I scale it up or down, how it's going to look. I'm going to have it not scaled at all. And now when I paint with this brush, I'm just going to change my color right now to black. If I paint with this brush, what we will see is happening is it is now tiling that. So there is my wood grain, and it's being tiled. So if we want the wood grain texture that we find to work with our brush, and we haven't made it into a repeating seamless texture, which that's a discussion for a different day. That's just a standard Photoshop technique where then you offset your image and then you fuzz up the joint where the edges line up and you can create a repeating tile texture. But if we don't do that, what I can do is I can scale my texture up. So then when I paint with it, we can see now it's actually painting what appears to be the wood grain. And the image is working as it paints, so it's applying its own transparency. So anything that was black in my texture is opaque. Anything that is white would be 100% transparent. Anything that would be somewhere in between. So I brought in, as we can see, a colored image, but it's treating it based on its grayscale information. So anywhere that's less than black is now somewhat transparent. And we can see that taking effect if I paint over something. So we can see where I'm painting that texture over the top. Now, if I don't want black wood grain, if I want it to actually look like wood, well then at that point I probably would need to add a new color and then find or choose my color as I see fit. Get a nice brown golden oak color, and now we can see I can paint with that oak texture. So you could create a nice depth with it. You can paint with this texture, and what's really nice after I have done this, whoa, and I lost everything. So working with the texture brush, that's really all it takes. And then we can, if you paint over it, it's effectively offsetting different versions of it. Whoop. And now if I go and select, we can see how each sits there. So that that is working with a textured brush. It can add in richness so your artwork doesn't look just purely flat, and you can get some pretty nice effects that way working with your textures. All right, so that's the first thing I wanted to go over today. The second thing is now working with multiple characters, and once we put those into our network view, we'll see how things get pretty ugly. But right now it's not too bad because I just have one drawing layer. But in this particular project, if I grab my red character, I can right click on it and choose distribute to layers, and we'll see that now, I'll just pull this up a little bit, it added layers for that red character. Now what is going to be useful here is just to quickly rename these. Because when I do then, oh, don't want to spin that though. If they're named, I'm going to find my life a little bit easier when I try to go into the network view here. So just a quick little renaming of my parts. Now, if I go into my second group here, I can repeat the process, highlight all those layers, right-click on it, choose Distribute to Layers. So this can be a handy way if you draw your artwork separately. You don't want to draw something, hit a layer, draw something, add a new layer, draw something, add a new layer. You can draw a bunch of things and then choose Distribute to Layers. I sometimes find that to be a little more natural way of working because the adding layers between each thing sometimes takes away from the spontaneity, the freshness of the drawing process. So some of you may have experienced that same kind of issue. This will be a green. Right foot, left foot. This will be my green torso. Green head, and this layer has nothing on it. That's the original drawing layer, so we can just delete that. I don't need that as part of my project. So now I have my layers all drawn. The next thing we can do is to repeat last week's lesson, highlight everything, add a peg. Now we've got a bunch of pegs. I can now go into my network view, and when I'm in my network view, if I click on display, I can then say order my network, hit the button, we get things all nicely ordered. So now I can see my different characters. There's my red character, there's my green character. So I'm going to just pull them apart a little bit so it's easier to situate them. To add a peg when you're in network view, it's just simply Command P or Control P if you're in Windows. There I have a peg, and then I can now connect my peg to those, and I'll rename this. This will be my red peg, and now I can repeat that oh wait, I need to add the peg first. Add the peg for the other ones. This will be my green peg. So now each one has a peg, and it's just a matter of connecting them. So once I have completed this, now what I can do, because we can see that very quickly my entire network view is going to get pretty ugly. These are simple characters, and yours are far more complex, where you have multiple parts for each arm and leg, multiple parts for the head, for the torso. So you have tons of pegs and tons of drawing layers, and it's getting really ugly when you look at your primary composite. The thing to remember is each time you have a composite, that composite is generating a bitmap. So it's rendering whatever's connected to that deposit down as a bitmap And in this case, this one composite is now going to my display so we can see it, and it's also going to a write module, which is then where it allows it to then render it out as a video or render it as frames or a single image or whatever we choose to do with it. But what I can do to organize this is I can now highlight all of the drawing layers, pegs, and master peg that belong to one of my characters. I can right click on that and choose Group with Composite. This is really nice. Because if I just choose Group, we'll watch what happens. And we'll see where it grouped everything, but it still has all their outputs going to my main composite. So it's still kind of ugly. Because if I want to move one of these characters in front of the other, I have to move all of those network nodes. And yeah, that's just no fun. So let's try again. So I highlight all the pegs and drawing layers that belong to one character. Right click, Group with Composite. It's Command-Shift-G or Control-Shift-G on Windows. Select that, and now we can see how nice and organized that is. Now if I hit this right arrow on that, it gives me this view. And just pull this down a little bit. We can see. So I have a multi-port in, multi-port out. Then I have all of my layers and pegs that were there before going to their very own composite. And then that composite goes to this output. Click on this, I'm back in my main view. So to repeat that, highlight, right-click, Group with Composite. There it is. And now you can see that my network view has grown increasingly cleaner. So then I'm not looking at a gazillion things going into that one composite, freaking out when I want to put one character in front of another or something like that. So this would be a preferred way of organizing your network view, because once it's into a character like this, we can now click on the arrow, select things as needed. So now if I want to move that character, so we can see I put red on top over there, but now if I go back out, if I take red and go here, we can see now green is on top. Oh, and my light table is turned on. Let me just turn that off. Or try to. There. So now we can see, if I flip-flop my order, a very easy way, just move one connection to change the stacking order. So I would encourage you, as your project grows, as you add in multiple entities and decide to start animating them, that you organize things and group them with composites. Because also doing this allows us to apply additional effects and other cool things to your project. So this is the first step, allowing us to then do more and more awesomeness. Have fun.